And we're live.
Awesome.
Episode 39 is Mr. Chuck Poland, who aptly named himself the Wookiee Hunter in the chat box here, which is hilarious. Uh, it's I'm very glad that you said you would come on to talk to me and hang out and talk to folks in the live chat and stuff like that. Exactly because we just had to stop mid conversation so I could hit the live button. Because like that is because I put in the little show blurb or what have you that you're one half of Reptile Fight Club and tiny geckos and Simalia pythons and all these different things. And if you look Chuck up on social media, there's outdoor keeping, there's herping, there's all sorts of different things, and then the of course running joke about the McInWookie. But the big thing on Reptile Fight Club for you is when if you were just to take social media and look at your collection, right? It's pretty eclectic, but in consideration of, the Burks of the world and people like that on the smaller side, right? But then to hear you speak, especially on the podcast, you are really opinionated, which is cool, but also very knowledgeable and you back things up. And we literally were just going through talking about the next carpet python book and herping in the States and all sorts of different topics. So I'm very happy that that's how we started, was having to shut each other up to hit the live button real quick. So that's awesome. Thank you for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. I mean, to be honest, Bill, I don't know. I sometimes, I don't know if I belong on Lizard Brain Radio. I kind of consider myself a snake guy at heart, and I dabble in lizards and have had some mild success. But I don't know. You crush it so hard, man. And I love everything you do. The education piece, the podcasting piece, like it's just awesome. It's awesome. So thank you for having me. And
Of
yeah,
course.
I mean. Yeah, it's great.
That's actually, not in a derogatory way. I think of you as a person who is a successful snake keeper who also keeps lizards as well. But that's actually why I thought to contact you. I talked to Justin and Eric, and they had this weird transition of being, menagerie guys back in the day to hardcore snake guys, and now they're kind of lizard dabblers, and you're kind of seeing that more often. And then you have really unique snake experiences. You're keeping coastals outside, and then you have scrubs and different things, and even in the snake world, those are pretty unique things. And then when you went to lizards, like even your lizard choices seem to be pretty, like viper geckos, day gecko, like you didn't just get a bearded dragon and a cresty or whatever. Like you had what seemed to me, you had very specific choices for the stuff that you kept. And is that driven by where you live? Because you seem to take a lot of consideration into like the outdoor keeping and stuff. And so is that kind of a big driver for you on the lizard front, or how did you go that way?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I feel like so. I mean, in the past, and you can probably, if anyone ever wanted to take the time to look at my Facebook, I have I call it the Great Snake Book. I think it's one of my photo albums, but most of all of the snakes that I've ever kind of kept and stuff I've kept is in that album. And it goes through carpets. I've done some monitors. I kept some Ackie monitors. I've had green tree monitors. So I've dabbled. Just a toe in a lot of different stuff. And I'm kind of, interested in so many different things. So maybe like a jack of all trades, a master of none, would probably be an apt way to describe myself. And then, I in addition to my reptile keeping, I also, went to school and studied environmental science. So that got me interested in the natural world and, how the environment, all the factors that work in the environment and how, human climate change happens and all those things that are happening and relevant to us now, as well as, my reptile keeping. Like those two pieces just kind of came together, and that's where kind of like, man, I could totally keep all this stuff outside. I could totally start doing that. And I wish I didn't live in kind of a track home community where, you know, my neighbors are right behind me. I live in a typical California neighborhood, so I have a lot of neighbors. So otherwise, I mean, I would have like a Tom Crutchfield backyard where I just had tons of stuff out there. But I try to, I'm limiting it. I'm gonna put my diamond pythons outside, and I probably will try to pick up some Metcalfi, some inland carpet pythons from Justin. He did pretty well with those this year, and I'm gonna probably get a pair, raise them up, and then when comes time, I'll set them outside. So probably just 3 carpet species outside. And, you know, I through the podcast have gotten to talk to people like Ron St. Pierre, who just absolutely kill it outside with lizards. And, you know, I don't know that I have the confidence yet to do tougher lizard species outside. But man, he sure makes it look like, you know, makes it look good. And I just enjoy talking to him. I enjoy the you know, Justin and I just were talking about, we just did a clip show and we were talking about how, you know, Ron is just such a cool guy and he gets your brain going and he's fun conversation. And that's so, like, you know, I enjoy this. I enjoy the people and the characters and I enjoy the process of thinking and setting things up. So yeah, I like to work with species now more than in the past that complement make more sense in the area I live and in, you know, the way I have not only my indoor snake room set up, but also my outdoor snake room.
Right. So I think it's funny. And I wonder if it occurs to someone like yourself and the people that it would be affected by probably don't listen to a lizard podcast, but I wonder if you realize how many hearts you probably break when you call yourself a jack of all trades and a master of none, but then you're the Halmahera guy.
Yeah, I mean,
there's probably a lot of people who are like, "What do you mean you're not a master? I'm amazing, and I couldn't do what you did." Like,
I guess I just don't think of myself as special. I you know, like I don't know, man. You know, we all kind of, I'm good because I'm around good people. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
I didn't come up with breeding Tracier all by myself. That was talking to Terry Phillip and Ryan Young and Justin Julander, and, you know, some people who are way, way, way better at reptiles than I am. And, you know, I mean, I definitely observe what's going on and I definitely take note and I play the long game. And I think that there's, you know, just some like really basic things that if you're committed to something, you find something that you love and you're committed to it, it's not that hard. You just have to kind of surround yourself with the right people, think through your process and be willing to take risks and make changes, you know? I mean, but like what, you know, how hard was Tracier to do? I had a long list of things that people tried in the past that didn't work out so well. So I knew what not to do. I knew what would probably not work out well. And so, you know, trying things that, you know, and we were kind of, you know, and I feel like we've kind of gone through an evolution in herpetoculture. And I definitely think you can see this in like captive red tree monitors and really tougher to breed scrub pythons, where people are starting to have more success because we fundamentally changed some of the ways that we think about how we keep reptiles in captivity. We went ahead and challenged some of the ideas about what we thought they did in the wild, and we doubled down on things like natural history and herping out in the wild and making observations. You know, a lot of the guys go to Australia and look and they find stuff and they're like, yeah, could you believe it? It was raining, it was cold, and we found a carpet just crossing the road. Like, so, you know,
Yep.
it's things like that when you go out into nature and you challenge those ideas that you thought you knew, all of a sudden you come back better and more prepared to make different choices inside your reptile room. And I think that's a huge part of why we're seeing such a second wave of success in things that we really hadn't been very successful in the past. And I think a lot of it is just time and patience. If you don't have the patience, you're not going to have success, especially with harder to breed stuff, especially with wild caught stuff. It's just and so to take it all back, like, I'm not anybody special. I've been doing this a while, but I think of the Terry Phillips, and I think of, the Ron St. Pierre's and the Ed Bradleys and the old school guys, or the guys who are just brilliant at this. And I'm nowhere near those guys, but I'm persistent, and I think about what's going on. And if you can do that, I just don't think that, anybody can have the success that I have.
Agreed. Absolutely. I find it really interesting that, so you hear people talk about how, like, the ball python hobby is almost different. It's not even like it's its own hobby from reptiles, right? And we get a part of herpetoculture where, like, we make fun of the ball python hobby or whatever, and you have like stereotypical personalities associated with that or what have you. And I always think it's funny that in the nerd side of herpetoculture where I'm at, where, like, I keep a couple ball pythons because I use them for shows, but, like, I don't breed or make money. Like, I don't care. That's not my jam.
Yeah.
On my side of it, or what I think of the part that I'm in, it's always been funny to me, especially you guys' podcast, that the longer it's been going, the personalities that you guys interview and debate with, and you and Justin's style of debate, that personality is successful. Like, all the guys that you just described did the exact same thing that you did. They just did it for longer, and so they have, like, more species or whatever in their checkbox, or however you want to say it. But, like, they're self-effacing. They're not like king scrub guy. But all of those people refer to you as the dude who was successful with Halmaheras. Like, you just don't know that because you're not in those conversations, because they wouldn't say it if you were standing right there. Like, so you are still in the same realm of conversation as all of those people. It's just that that's not how they talk. Like,
yeah,
they don't talk about, oh, the best monitor dude ever. The best monitor dude ever was Frank Reitz, and he doesn't care. He's on Facebook in the North American Herping group taking pictures of zebra tail lizards. Like, he doesn't care. He genuinely doesn't. No, he's bred everything you've ever seen, and a bunch of stuff nobody's ever heard of. And he's just some old dude chilling in the desert. Like,
he's cool because you can agree with him or you can disagree with him, but he's in that group, and he's posting every day, and he's saying things, and people are lighting him up like, oh, that's wrong. But he's getting people to think. He's getting people to challenge their ideas, to challenge what their notions are. And he's saying, well, look, I see this. What is this? I don't, tell me this isn't a thing. Here it is right here. So what is this? And people can argue about that, and I like Reptile Fight Club for that, is because it should all be a healthy debate, because in the end, when you think you know something, that's when you've put yourself in the corner, you know what I mean? And I mean, I guess I don't know. You're never gonna get me to be like I'm the guy for anything. I just don't think of myself like that.
But I think that's the point. Like, I think when you look at herpetoculture and you see folks who are like, oh, how do you do X species, whatever it is, right? And it's like, why don't you just chill out and keep them?
Yeah.
And then good stuff will probably happen. Because, like, I kind of crack jokes about that. Like, if you look at your Instagram and you see, like, there's just like 6 pictures of scrub pythons, and they're just like sitting on a dowel rod or something. Like, it's not it's not like you like in a tux with a scrub or some insane crap. Like
No.
it's literally just some snakes and then like a bunch of field herping and other things.
Yeah. And to be honest, my Instagram is it's weird because I'm not a typical snake person or a reptile person in their Instagram where it's just all reptiles and that's all it is. Like I use that Instagram. It's my life. My family's in there. My hobbies are in there. My snakes are in there. You know, my lizards are in there. It's all in there. And I think that's kind of, I don't know. For me, that's kind of, you know, I consider myself more than just a reptile guy. I try to, you know, I try to find all avenues of inroads and all the things that I find interesting. I take pictures of, and it just goes on there. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably a mess. It's a little weird. People are like, wait, I followed this guy and it's like a bunch of random, like, what the hell is this? Right. So,
Well, but that's the thing. It's social media. It's your
yeah,
actual social life. Your social life is not sitting in your snake room. And so,
yeah, for sure.
I mean, that kind of jives. Yeah. No, I just think like,
oh yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say I can't take 200 pictures of myself and put it on my Instagram and not feel like that I'm a bad person. So I don't know. I just take pictures.
It's just a personality thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It's so strange to me to, especially like, so you guys' podcast is on the NPR network and my podcast is on Herpeticulture Network. And which is funny because it's not in any way a competitive thing. But
No.
when you look at the groups of people that comprise those things, it's a bunch of people like that.
Yeah.
Like I can't really think of anybody in either of those groups that's like the guy or the girl for the whatever. Like they're not like that. Mm-hmm. They are, if you know, if you were to text somebody and say, you know, hey, you know, knobtail geckos or whatever, and they'd be like, oh, Justin and Phil and all these guys, and then, you know, like they are the person for whatever it is that they're super into, but like they aren't, similar to yourself where they're not the person who proclaimed that. Like you ask somebody else and they're like, oh yeah, message that guy, like it's super cool, he'll answer your question, you know, good to go, whatever. And I've just always found it strange, especially listening to you guys when you go back and forth with debates and stuff, and you guys debate more than just like which light is better or whatever. Like you get actually in depth and it is more of a cultural and sometimes philosophical debate topics. Mm-hmm. And to hear you guys talk about those things, like that's where that really comes through of super knowledgeable people who are really humble, but are in these giant reference point groups of like, you could basically figure out anything about Australia by asking one of these guys something. Like it's, you know, it's an amazing array of people. And it's always been strange to me that outside like the larger quote unquote sphere of Facebook or herpeticulture or whatever you would call it, can't look at that and go, oh, that's the recipe. Right? Like, oh, how do you breed these snakes? And it's like, oh yeah, 86 degrees and just close the door and shut up. That's how that happens. Like it's a recipe. Like Owen and Eric make fun of that all the time of how people ask them to breed carpet pythons and they're like, there's 50 episodes, dude. Just read one, like, you know, or whatever. And
I don't subscribe to an idea of a recipe. Like that's counter to, I mean, I don't think there's such thing as a recipe because your place isn't like my place. And how I keep my snakes may not be how you keep your snakes. And how I feed may not be how you feed. And so like you see people with all different parameters to what they do. And each of them can be successful in their different areas, different methods, and different ways, which to me denotes an extreme plasticity to reptile reproduction and what we do, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I think that's one of the things that's so hard and why I feel so so passionate that Reptile Fight Club and that Justin, I don't want to speak for him, but I'm pretty sure he feels this way as well, is that in some way the guys who are kind of doing this kind of stuff are fighting for the soul of the reptile community. We don't want it, at least in my book, we don't want to be the recipe ball python people. We don't want to, because it's the cavern is so much deeper than that. And if we just reduce ourselves to that shallow pool, we'll miss out in so many ways and so many opportunities to really make it a potential difference. If that's all we are, is just, surface level ball python breeders who are in it for the flashy colors and the pretty snakes, and this is the way you do it, and boom, and it's done, and you sell them, and it's a market thing, and and don't get me wrong, like Justin Kabilka is awesome. Like the things that he's doing are awesome, and he's a guy who is taking ball python mutations to that next level, and he's doing his thing, and that's good. That's great. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with breeding ball pythons for mutations, but you have to aspire to that next thing or something more meaningful. I feel like Ricky Bobby in Talladega Nights. What do I do with my hands?
I get it. I talk with my hands.
I do too. Yeah, as you can see. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where I when Justin asked me if I wanted to do it, I felt like there was, and when we talked about it, I felt like there really was a good opportunity for us to, kind of do something more. And there's enough people out there that are really, doing crazy cool stuff. The stuff that's just really pushing new boundaries into new places. And they're not always people that, are thought of at the forefront, or some of them, you got to talk them into wanting to come on because they just don't want any part of it.
I've had several of those.
Yeah. I mean,
sure.
I want Casey Lassick to come on, and that's just probably never going to happen. And it's like, dude, the Casey Lassick story needs to be told, right? Like that. I mean, but I get it. I get why he's like, no, thanks. Nope. But I don't know. It's been really fun. I hope we're making that difference. I hope we're, pushing the boundary a little bit. And it is tough for me though, because I don't consider, I mean, man, Justin's next level. You know what I mean? He really is next level guy. And I just, I'm lucky to have him as a friend. And he always says nice stuff about me, but man, I always say I'm always the co-host and he's always the host. And I believe that.
Unless you're remembering somebody's name.
Yeah. Then I got to help him out because woo. Yeah, I'm worried about his early onset dementia.
I just love listening to episodes where you guys will be neck deep in crazy, like, technical things, and you're talking about natural history and all this stuff. And then right in the middle of it, he's like, who was that guy? There's a guy. He did this exact thing that we just talked about for 20 minutes. And I don't know his name. And everybody's like, what? It's fantastic.
I know. No, and he gets me so good because it's like he forgets, and I'm like, he can't mean that guy. That guy? And he's like, yeah, that's it. And I'm like, oh my God. He really
the most famous person ever for whatever topic it was.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so funny. He's good. He's good like that for a laugh.
So, actually, speaking of your co-host, one of the things you guys reference quite a bit in your episodes is field herping.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk to us a little bit about field herping, because you have quite a few pictures actually in your social media of that as well. Are you
Yeah.
a local field herp guy? Do you travel for that quite a bit, or how does that work for you?
So, I mean, honesty and truth and reporting here. I'm fairly new to field herping, and which is probably one of the most ridiculous things, and the biggest travesties of probably my life right now is that in the area that I live, field herping is like gold out here. I
Hmm.
live, in San Diego County, and if you just travel a little into the Anza Borrego Desert and up into the high desert, it's some of the best herping and some of the most amazing reptiles in North America. So and that's something that's been very, very recent for me. And
Okay.
part of it is well, and I owe it to Justin because when he comes out, he's like, "Hey, I'm going out there. You coming? Like, let's go." And sure, man, I'm going. But I don't have, and this goes to like being that semi reclusive, get off my lawn reptile guy. I don't have a lot of reptile friends out here. You know what I mean? And so if I had somebody in my area that I could go out every weekend. If Justin lived closer to me or I live closer to Justin, best believe I'd
Right.
be out every weekend. But I don't, and my job's kind of a little tough sometimes to get away from. And excuses, excuses, excuses. But yeah, I mean, and so the field herping thing has been recent, but it's been
Okay.
fantastic. And I it's funny because Eric Burke used to not be much of a field herper until he started into it, and now you can see him, and he's all about it. He's all about the herp, Rob and him and Justin, and they're planning regular herp trips and trips to Australia, and it's like once you do it, you're like, oh, wow. Okay. So I get my total fix. I get, it's pretty much all things. You get to commune with nature. You get to hone your skills as a, you know, as a herpetologist, just running around looking for stuff. You get to find cool things. You get to, check off a list. You get to, interact with snakes and lizards that you don't have to clean up their poop and feed and do all this stuff with. You can just put them right back where take some photographs of them and leave them. And that's, anybody who's, kept a collection for a while, man, it's a chore to take care of it. And sometimes it keeps you from being able to go out and do stuff. And so it's kind of like, oh, wow, this is pretty amazing that I can go out and spend a weekend, camp, whatever, hike around, find chuckwallas, find rubers, find, specs, whatever, and take some photographs of them and leave them be. And I walk away with an incredible experience, and, they get to go on to do their thing. So yeah, it's been, it's new, but it's been amazing. And it's funny because Justin has for a long time been like, why did more people not herp? Like, why do they not go out and look for this stuff? And, I just don't think that they've had a good somebody to lead them to water. You know what I mean? And Justin kind of
Sure.
led me to water, and it's definitely, you don't know what you're missing until you go out and do it.
Well, and
But
it's, I
man,
mean, that's like anything else. Like if you didn't grow up that way, like
mm-hmm,
if growing up, if your introduction to herpetoculture or herpetology or what have you was through pets and zoos, then that's what made sense to you. And so you just
mm-hmm,
kept doing it. And then you became an adult and got real money. And then you do it better.
yeah,
It,
yep,
it, like, especially when you talk to somebody like Justin or you hear him speak about different things, like he's a birder and his family's involved. And like he clearly came up that way and
mm-hmm,
had a whole bunch of experience in those things. And then as he came up as a reptile nerd, It was like, oh yeah, those two things just smash together. It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
okay, well then I guess they do. But
Yeah.
if you didn't come up that way, then that wouldn't make sense to you.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, recently, Justin. So they just the NPR crew just did their Arizona trip, and on Justin's way out there, he stopped by Anza Borrego, and I met him out there, and we did a night of herping. You may have seen the Cerastes and the spec that I posted. Beautiful, just amazing stuff. But we went out with Jordan Parrott, and Jordan grew up. I think he grew up more in the Palm Springs area, but he would drive down all the time, 1,000 nights out in the Anza Borrego is something he was saying. And him and his brother, we went out with them and they showed us all these spots. And I mean, it's like, it was the most cool thing. One, because here you have an old school herper showing you their spots. I'm like, whoa,
Which is a big deal.
That's a huge deal. That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And that's something that that it's a big trust thing. It's something that really kind of showed like, wow, man, this guy's going to take us all to show us his spots. Like he really must trust us, and rightfully
Right.
so. I mean, I would never betray somebody's trust like that, and I would never, I mean, obviously, there's people out there who, are shady and they'll go rape and pillage the land, and that's not cool. But man, it was, just an amazing night, and going out with somebody who really knows an area and has herped it, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nights. It's just, you really like he literally could tell us, okay, you'll find this from about this part in the road till about right here. No, don't go any further. Turn around. Let's head back. Like, it was that good. And he's like, yes, you'll find this here. You'll find this here. You'll find that here. It was amazing. Like, amazing. And it was like one of those things of like, wow, I am a rookie right now, like the biggest rookie upon rookies. Like it was fantastic. And I don't know, it was something that you just, unless you get out there and do it, unless you can find people like that, you'll never really, you have to go out there and really make it a thing. And I mean, he spent, Jordan spent how much time out there to do that. And he knows,
right.
knows that area so well. I mean, that was probably a better part of his childhood out there, just herping night after night. And so, it's, I don't know, it's hard for me to put into words, in a very short time, the perspective that I got that was so amazing about going out and herping an area. And especially we were kind of talking about, Australia before we started, and how, the Aussies tend to call them crappets, and they take it for granted. and how right. I kind of feel like we do a bit of the same thing in North America, right? Like, us Americans, like, we have crazy amounts of awesome reptiles here, but we tend to look, and maybe this is a human thing, maybe this is not, but we tend to look to Australia. We tend to look to Indonesia. We tend to look to, Madagascar, Africa, all these other continents, where there's stuff that's different and cool, but, right in your own backyard, drive an hour and go for a hike, or just road cruise an area, for a few hours in the evening. And you'd be amazed what you'll find. Cool stuff, stuff that is common, but until you find it, you're like, wow, I didn't really realize how cool that was. So I don't know. I definitely am new to herping, but it's one of those things where you do it and you get the bug for it, and you're like, oh, wow, I've really been missing out. Now we just need Governor Newsom to do something about gas in California, so I can actually afford to drive out there.
Yeah, you don't have to hitchhike.
Ridiculously priced, right? And that's a whole other set of risk. I don't know,
Well, and it's like that. I talk to people a lot about like herpeticulture, or the idea of herpeticulture, social media and Facebook and different things, and then like all these old school dudes, and it seems that the people that I seem to congregate toward are that style of person. And then, especially like California is a classic one. Like California has like this whole that they're famous for having like subcultures, right? Surfing into skateboarding, all kinds of things.
Yep.
Herping was kind of like that. Like if you think about like rosy boas, like they're like all these different localities of rosy boas and all kinds of different things like that. And then when you talk about king snakes, and if you hear someone who's like old school, not a transient Californian, a person who is from California, like grandparents from California type of person, and you start to have you hear all these reference points, like Anza Borrego, like I only knew that from rosy boas. Like I know logically that it's a place, but like that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
I'm from Illinois. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then you hear these different like greaser kings and all these different things for like California king snakes, and it's like, no man, these are places where like these 8 people that gave a crap like checked out king snakes from their own place or whatever. Like the super famous one is San Francisco garters or what have you. But like as you get farther into Southwest, like all the West Texas dudes that are super hardcore into Alterna or whatever, like, and all the different people, in Arizona, like that they know where to find rattlesnakes or whatever. Like there's these like hardcore subcultures of like you had to grow up there and know a guy to even see one of those things.
Yep.
But then you get to the herpetoculture, and I think that might be kind of like a driving force behind that of, but like all us people in the Midwest, right? I, as a kid, always looked to foreign things and exotics, quote unquote, because like all of my local stuff is kind of plain Jane, and I wasn't super into turtles as a young guy or amphibians as much. And that's where we really have a ton of diversity. And so like my son is huge into turtles. And so we live in a great space for that. But I really wasn't when I was growing up. And so for me, I got some rat snakes, some racers, some garters. Like, I don't have a ton of diversity where I live.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, dude, like boas and, all these yellow snakes from Indonesia or whatever, because it didn't occur to me that, especially being a younger person, like I couldn't go herping in the American Southwest or whatever, like to gain that appreciation, I suppose.
Sure. And
then fast forward into the Facebook generation, and you have us where we're like, I've actually made this argument a couple of times of like, man, why do so many people keep bearded dragons like instead of chuckwallas or whatever? Like,
right? No, dude, totally.
Yeah. But
I'm like, chucks are cool, they're awesome, and then I look at beardies and I'm like,
see, but I think it's because people of my set in herpetoculture are who bred a million bearded dragons and a million crested geckos. And now like my kids and people a little older than my kids who have their own money are who they're buying them now. And when I was coming up, beardeds were super cool. And I just didn't have a concept of desert iguanas, collared lizards, chuckwall. Like the fact that we literally have the exact same things in our country that would fill that exact same niche.
Yeah.
It just never occurred to me because of where I live. And when I've been going to Tinley forever. And I went there and it was like, oh my God, these are Australian whatever. And it's like, dude, it's an Australian fence lizard. It's just bigger. Like that's all that thing is, and then you get to now and it's like, oh, you kids, why don't you keep a chuckwalla, quit inbreeding depression, your stupid bearded dragons, blah, blah. And it's like, well, yes, I know that now as a dude with white in my beard, but it's my set of idiots that bred a million bearded dragons. Like we could have bred a million chuckwallas and we didn't.
Well, and I will say though that, back in the day, when what we would call old school herpers were going out and wild collecting herps in North America, nobody cared. There were no rules around that. Nobody would have
Right.
stopped. Like the regulation of that is something that happened between the old school and the new school. And so, you almost wonder, like, did the bearded dragon come about because the chuckwalla became less accessible, or
True.
or, or is it something of more of like, well, we don't have this here, so this is something different, something we can't get here, and you just wonder where people focus, or why people focus. I think
Yeah.
um,
And I'm sure
yeah,
there's a million factors. Like, a bunch of the importers are in Florida. And so,
mhm.
it wouldn't occur to them you're not going to import stuff from California and Arizona. Like,
Right.
you're going to import boas from South America, or when you're importing everything else that you are, because you're a dude who lives by a port in wherever,
Yep.
and I mean, I'm sure there are a ton of mitigating factors in relation to that, but like, you can just see that, now you hear like, oh man, these used to be $20 and nobody cared. Now they're so hard to import and da da da. And it's like, well, those used to be $20 and nobody cared, and you could drive there and get them, except they changed the rules. And so you're seeing a lot of the same complaints, I guess, but
Hmm.
the framework is just a little different.
Hmm.
Like,
Absolutely.
it's not CITES or worried about Malaysia or whatever. It's, oh well, they listed, you know, spotted lizards or whatever it may be, and the end result is, kind of the same.
Hmm. Well, and it's weird. Like, you can buy Arizona rosy boas in California, but you can't buy California rosy boas in California. Somebody
Right.
can come from Arizona or Utah and get a collection permit and take reptiles from California, but people in California can't get a permit to, well, for some reptiles, not all reptiles, but so some of the rules and the way we do things is kind of dumb, and it probably doesn't help us, in perpetuating some of the awesomeness of North American reptiles.
Oh yeah. Well, and I've kind of, especially, not to get on the crazy politics of today, but um, like, our current politics are insane, right?
Yeah, they're
And
absolutely
that's
out.
just an accepted American
Yeah.
thing, that our politics are insane. But to I'm a science nerd and I do a whole bunch of
Hmm.
other stuff. But to sit and look at things like that, just on the science nerd side of it, of like, why are we like that? You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
we're humongous. Our country's
Hmm.
humongous.
Hmm.
Between you and I, it's a different. We live on different planets. Like,
Hmm.
I am an hour south of Chicago, in the middle of Illinois, next to a cornfield, and you're talking about going to the high desert with your buddy from Utah. Like, we don't live in the same place.
Definitely not.
And but you run into all these weird things like that. Like,
Hmm.
people can come to California and collect, or they can't, or whatever. And then Illinois has these weird rules of like, um, Colorado river toads are considered medically significant here, or like, we have different licensure, because I have Boiga, but I don't have
Hmm.
any uh, real venomous, or however you want to classify
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And we can't have any non-United States native venomous at all. Like, there's just different rules for all these different things.
Hmm.
And you start talking about like, oh, why don't we keep chuck walls instead of bearded dragons or whatever? And it's like, well, all you guys think Indonesian stuff is super cool. Yo, you live in California, where you could fit like a lot of Indonesias inside California. It's
Hmm.
a little tiny place. Like, people just don't think about it. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like,
Hmm.
and it's like, well, how could it be so different? And it's like, all Indonesia is the size of like Ohio. What are you talking about? We got like 50 of those. You know what I mean? Like, you go by Justin's house and the Gila monsters are pink. Are you
Yeah,
kidding? Like,
yeah,
it's a different, it's just so diverse.
yeah.
And we don't ever think about it, because it's like a really uniquely American thing to
Hmm.
think. We think about America, and then we think about other countries.
Mhm.
and your brain just makes them the same. And you're like, oh yeah, they're that guy is from Malaysia. And it's like, well, that's like saying that dude's from Indianapolis. It's not like
Mhm.
saying he's from America.
Yeah.
It's so different. And like we can't put it together because we're born in this one, not that one.
Yep.
And it's just a weird reference point. You know what I mean? And but then you see it in these progressions of just strange laws of like, why would you write that so weird? And it's like, oh well, because you basically live in your own country that has deserts
Yeah.
and mountains and redwoods and
Well,
an
it,
ocean and all these crazy things where I'm like, we got Lake Michigan and corn. Like
and
it's
I
just
and I
so
feel like,
different.
but I feel like it. I feel like, and especially in, states' rights is such a big thing where the federal government says kind of we're not going to get into states' rights. So each state is up to make its own rules and regulations, and you're right. The North American continent is so vast and it changes so much from south to north and from east to west, that you get such a wide range and it's so different. And all those different states have all those different rules because there's a story behind each one of those rules, just like
For
how
sure.
pink helidermas made it into the hobby, because they're found in a certain place. And unless you understand that's where they are and that's where they came from and when they came into the hobby, or how something comes into the hobby, like, oh, that's why, because that's where it came from. There, somebody went there and they
Hmm.
collect. I get it. Okay, I didn't know that story, right? And so whether you're talking reptile regulation or whether you're talking a certain, you know animal that looks a certain way, I promise you there's a story behind that. And that's kind of one of the cool parts. And when we were herping with Jordan, that he knows all those old school like carpet guys, the Larry Black, the Lloyd Lemke. He just had Dave and Tracy, like, just he had all these great stories where it's like, oh, cool, like you heard all of, like, like we think of these people in the carpet world as people of lore and of the old school herpers who started it all. But there's to me there's really interesting stories and what these people did. And when you start to hear all that, and this is why I want to hear, why I want to get the Casey Lazics on and get these stories, because most people don't have the history. We it's weird. It's like today's herpetoculture and the herpetoculture of the past are separated in kind of
Hmm.
some ways. So you don't have a continuity of story. And like when you're able to interface with those older guys, you get some of that like connectivity of story and how things happen. And you know, like reptile legislation or fish and wildlife rules, they're dumb, but there's a reason why they got that way, right? And if you understand that, you can be like, all right, it's dumb, but I see where that came from, right?
Yep.
It seems less arbitrary when you can get the story. It could still be not make sense, but something had to have happened for that. And even if it's just, hey, we're fish and wildlife, we have a budget, we need money, we need to do this so we can get money. Okay, so that's where that legislation came from. It was budget funding. It was a need for budget funding. It isn't that they actually want to take reptiles away, it's that they need money to exist. Okay,
Hmm.
I understand that, I get that. And it's hard for us to understand the natural history, understand where we are in herpetoculture, understand where we need to go if we can't get the actual story that's behind a lot of this stuff, right? If we got the
Yep.
actual story and we really understood what we were talking about, it would be less about being manipulated and more about being able to be like, oh, okay, this, this is a solid basis where we're all on the same page to move forward. And we're just not in that, and it's a shame, right? Like it is kind of a shame when, especially when you can kind of meet and know people who have that story in the back, and you see all this stuff happening today. And it's like, how do we how do we get that? I don't, it's like, how do we bridge all those gaps? And it just seems to be, like you said, it's chaos in our modern world, as far as politics and all of the just silliness that's happening. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse, because the solutions are not getting easier. They're getting harder. And so people want to talk about, the problem less, because it's not, the solutions are tougher to come by. So they just make up other stuff. It's just like, don't look at the problem behind this. Right. So it's like, I don't know. It's frustrating. And I feel like everybody feels it and understands. Like you can kind of feel things slipping away in some ways. Like we're losing our right, our chance to own reptiles is going away, and our our protection of their habitats and our preservation of natural spaces is also going away. So it's like, what are we doing? What's happening here? I don't know. It's kind of sad. It sucks. And I think, maybe to tie all this long rant back, that's one of the other reasons why I think field herping is so important, man, is go out there and see it while you can.
Yeah.
And go find it, because it's out there. I'm telling you, like, if you can road cruise and you can find 3 snakes in a night on a road, randomly driving down back and forth the same road, think about in those mountains, out in those granite boulder, the vast granite boulders of the Southwest, how many reptiles are out there, right? It's just crazy. It's just crazy. Oh man, I thought I was going to get away without the dog, but yeah, Ruby has now blessed your podcast.
I was going to say, anybody who listens to the Fight Club should know.
Oh my gosh. I tried. I was so close. I thought maybe we'd get a break this time. Like, I don't want to bring Fright Club drama onto Lizard Brain Radio, but cattle dogs like their drama. So
for sure. So now that we're almost an hour in, tell everybody about your fantastic lizard keeping, since I did name this Lizard Brain Radio. But,
yeah.
No, I did not mean that as a slight. I was telling my wife before this podcast that, like, I was like, I have no idea if we'll talk about lizards. It's going to be awesome. So this is fully what I was hoping for in our conversation. But no, you do keep really cool geckos, and I'm always interested in how those things, like, the choices that led you to those, because specifically the stuff that you keep, you don't really interact with it. It's very small and delicate, and like there's some really specific requirements to the things that you've chosen to keep. So like what pushed you that way, as opposed to something that might be a little quote unquote easier for you to, as a keeper?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's such a good question. I kind of got into, I got into day geckos, and I started with Phelsuma grandis, which is much more commonly kept. I mean, they're invasive in Florida, for crying out loud. So that I started with that, and generally the way I work is I have a jumping in point, and I would say that Phelsuma grandis was my jumping in point, and then I kind of started looking around at some of the other kind of geckos in kind of the day gecko kind of genre, and I stumbled on Frank Payne and William's Eye, and was just really interested in that story. They're just a tiny gecko with such a limited range. They're threatened, then I started kind of getting into Frank's story and what Frank does, and I'm like, this is really cool. This is a guy who's taken something that's endangered. He has just absolutely learned how to do it and just killed it. And so I got some William's Eye. and I bred them, and I mean, still breeding them, and I have such a hard time with the babies. And just tiny geckos are really tough. And
Mm-hmm.
as a snake guy, I'm like, I get that part of it, but like the tiny gecko thing is really new to me. So trying to work my way, try to reestablish my process. Okay, what's good here? What's not good here? What am I doing wrong? Why am I having this problem? Why am I having that problem? And it's interesting because in my experience, like with snakes, like you can pretty much treat the babies just like the adults. And I have tried to do that with the Williamsi, and I have just not had great success doing that. And so it's been a challenge for me. I mean, from Williams I got into Barbonica, Phelsuma barbonica, which is they're really cool. I want to pick up some Ornata, and then I've got what else have I got? Gosh, I've got the Viper geckos. I've got standing eye. I've got Phelsuma standing eye. So if Grandis is a northern ranging day gecko in Madagascar, the standing eye would be the southern ranging. Very, very different, but super cool. A little bit more communal. Very different. Their skin is kind of their color and pattern is different. They look really great when they're babies, but maybe kind of suffer the ball python thing where they dull out a little when they grow up. But they still go through that, looking great, looking dull, looking great, looking dull thing. And so yeah, I've kind of got into the day geckos, and I've found, and especially with the Viper geckos as well, those babies are really kind of touchy. Like the adults bulletproof, Williamsi adults bulletproof, babies not bulletproof, not easy. So that's been one of those things that's been a real challenge for me, just because it's like it's not my wheelhouse. You know what I mean? That's not where the bulk of my experience comes from. So it's been an interesting kind of pivot for me to kind of go from, larger varanids or stuff that is more like, I get that makes sense to me, where, I can do these geckos, but then the babies are like, oh wow, this is a whole other, it's like the next learning evolution in keeping. And I didn't see that coming. So, I'm very, very good at reproducing them. It's just getting the babies, going and keeping them. I've had so many die on me that I'm just like, it's humbling too, because you're like, wow, you suck. You suck. You don't know what you're doing, right? And you think you're onto it, and you suffer a setback, and you're like, man, and it just makes me respect guys like Frank, and any of these guys who are doing a lot of these just really tiny geckos. And it's like, how do you do it? Like sometimes I'm like, I get discouraged, honestly. And
I get it.
It's tough, man. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy.
So you said that you're kind of on that snake path of babies like adults, just increasing enclosure size, but parameters generally the same. What are you seeing as differences where with babies to adults for these geckos? Is it a parameters thing where you're thinking there's a difference there, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think being extremely consistent with food intake, daily food intake with tiny geckos, absolutely critical. I think especially with the Williamsi, if you keep them too wet, not gonna live. So
Okay.
Although the adults will tolerate a bit more of a humid environment, the babies absolutely will not. And I was trying to keep maybe the babies a little too moist, and since then I've started to keep them much drier. So it's just I almost wouldn't say that it's vastly different, but you just they're so much smaller, and you have to be so much more critical with those parameters. That if you're not paying attention, and I think this is where it becomes hard, because I'm doing monitor lizards, I'm doing snakes, I'm doing tiny geckos, like all those things take you in a little bit different a direction. Is where, like, if I was just doing tiny geckos, it would be easier for me to focus, kind of that aim small, miss small kind of idea. But because I'm kind of all over the place, like, it's different scales of criticality in what I do, what I do for my outdoor coastals is different than what I do for my indoor snakes, and which is different from what I do for, lizards, which is different from what I do for tiny geckos. Like, it's just like, too much, So it's definitely been a challenge, and it's just one of those things where you kind of have to nail down that balancing act. And I feel like I've turned the corner a little bit. I don't know. I don't know if I would say that I'm good, but things seem to be doing, just making small tweaks. And I just, I like to think through until I find something that is like, okay, this is how you do this. And I just haven't yet. So it's just one of those things. I'll get it eventually, but it's been hard. It's been a challenge. So it's one of those things where you really respect people who do stuff in this hobby when you get into it, and you're just like, oh, I want to try this. I think I can do that. And you go do it, and you find out, like, oh, wow, this is tougher than I thought it was going to be. You can keep the adults, but then when you have the babies, you're like, oh, and it's funny, because I asked Frank, I was having problems with my Williams. I said, hey man, how do you keep your babies? He's like, I keep them just like my adults. Like, oh God, dude. Like, are you kidding me? Stop it. Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I'm just like, oh crap. Which either means I'm not keeping my adults right, but my adults produce eggs, consistently and regularly. The babies don't die right away. They seem to come out strong. Like, so it feels like I'm doing the adults right. So then the question becomes like, okay, if that's really the case with Frank, what's my disconnect? What am I doing wrong? What am I missing here? And so it's, that it's trying to figure through all that. That's been kind of a challenge for me. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with small geckos, and small geckos are, within the past couple years is all pretty new to me. And like most of my where I struggle is in the viper geckos and the Lygodactylus williamsi. But the grandis, I've probably got 25, maybe 30 babies of grandis and standing eye here. Like, they're no problem. That's easy. Wow. That's easy money.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so admittedly, and I've talked about this on Reptile Fight Club, I am a breeder, not a salesman. So I do so much better at breeding these animals than I do selling these animals. And, it's funny. I forgot, it's like I really haven't been producing. So I used to keep a lot of carpets, and then I backed way off. I slimmed so much of my stuff down, and I just kept my Tracier, and I kept those coastals. And I had a pair of satanic albino variegata that I got from Todd and Carrie King. And that was pretty much it. And so then I started back into the day geckos. I got a pair of mangrove monitors. And, I've been kind of doing more, but I really haven't been producing a lot. So, when I started producing more, I'm like, and I put up ads, and people would be like, well, yeah, I see you got day geckos. You have a sexed pair for this much money. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot how that is. Like, Jesus, people want like, and I don't know, that's weird to me too, man. Like, when I go into a species that I want, I don't really ask those questions. I'm not like, I want a sex pair, I want them breeder size ready, and I want to pay this price. I'm just kind of like, what do you have? Right. Oh, that's nice. How much do you want? Cool. Take it. I'll work the sexy now. I'll work all that stuff out. That's no problem. But right. I guess what I'm saying is I forgot how it is when you go to post ads and you get customers who inquire, and they just like, it's weird to me because it's kind of like that's part of the fun to me, is like finding stuff that you can, oh, I want this for my project, I want that for my project, oh, this turned out to be a male, oh, this turned out to be, oh, so you're kind of like, but you're still trying to pull stuff together yourself. I would never ask a breeder like, hey, turnkey this for me. I want, I just want to be able to take what you give me, turn around and start producing eggs from it. Like those Viper geckos I got were the first thing I've ever had that literally laid eggs probably a month after I got them. And I was like, oh, this is the weirdest thing ever. Like I didn't do anything here, right? Like I didn't have to feed it up. It was just like automatic. And it was the weirdest feeling ever. And so now that I'm kind of like started putting up ads for stuff, I'm kind of like, oh, well, I'm actually male heavy right now. And then I have some animals that are not quite sexable yet. So can't tell you if I have a sex pair. I'll get back with you if that's what you really want. And, I'm definitely a customer service oriented person. And I certainly like to overwhelm people with the quality of the animal and the customer service. And I don't breed a lot of stuff anymore. And so it's not, it's not something like my name's not out there, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure, it's funny because I'm competing with, people who have stuff like Gecko in their name. So they're obviously doing, lots of geckos, and it's like, yeah, I'm not that guy, but so it's been kind of, I don't know. I wish I could just sell my stuff and it would be super easy, or things like that, but it's not, it's not, it's it kind of cuts it like you almost question yourself sometimes, where it's like, man, if I have to work this hard to sell stuff, should I be breeding it in the first place? Like, you think if I were going to release Tracy, if it was, would you think I would have a problem doing that? No.
Right.
No.
Right.
And so I'm kind of like, when I do this, and it's like, I get a lot out of it. I enjoy it. And that's why I like to breed, like, and I like to raise babies, and I like to have all this stuff. And but it's kind of like when I meet mediocre success with sales, I'm like, well, is that a persistence thing, or is that a market thing, or like what, like what, how do I feel about that? You know what I mean? It's kind of tough. Like I feel like day geckos particularly have slapped me in the face a little bit, where I'm just like, oh, people want to pay way, way less than, and they're cool, man. I think day geckos are super cool. They're easy enough that they could be a first pet for somebody.
For sure.
And I guess I don't, and maybe they are super popular, but it doesn't seem like, it seems like, leopard geckos are way more, and maybe that's because they have more, the mutations and the, I don't know. I don't know. Or maybe they're just a little hardier. I don't think they are that much hardier though. So
I think a lot of,
they're more handleable. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the,
if you talk about younger people, I mean, that's probably a pretty big factor, but like for something like day geckos, like it's kind of twofold, right? Like there is still probably a little bit of the mindset of people who are remembering cheap Madagascar imports.
Yeah.
And just kind of haven't paid attention to the market as much on that. And then you see them again, or you see some posts or whatever, you're like, oh my God, those are cool. I'll look into that. And you look into it and you're like, that's a lot more money than I remember. And it's like, well, they're not imported anymore. It's not cheap imports. And like, people have always had a weird disconnect with that, where like they struggle to put two and two together. Like, well, how come Jim Bob's here is cheaper? And it's like, those are imported, dude.
Yeah. Well,
That's different. Like they
especially
struggle with that.
when there's the plentifulness of them, like Somalia clastolepis, right? Nobody's batting an eye at a $3,200 long-term wild caught female because there's just not that many of them in the country, period, anyway, right? So it's
True.
like when and scrubs used to be not expensive to import. Now they're expensive even as imports. And the captive bred stuff's getting even better prices, which, hey man, in my book, good. You know what I mean? Good, because it's not a group of snakes that everybody should be wanting to get into, especially some of the bigger stuff.
Right.
So if it's more of a price, to pay, cool. And I was in the pet shop getting some bugs the other day, and there was a Burmese python, a regular Burmese python that was like $380 or something like that. And I was like,
Wow,
that's good. That's
yeah.
good. Like, I mean, at least it's not $50 anymore, right? Like,
True.
So,
I'm just surprised it was even in a pet store.
I know.
That's
right?
getting to be rare.
Yeah. So, I think some things have changed. Definitely, we're seeing some impacts from importation, cutting down on importations. And I think, as things become more readily available captive wise, we're definitely seeing like money shifts in the market. And I think you're right. I think there's definitely some, people are used to when they see cheap pets, when they see cheap reptiles, they think, okay, that's the price for something. And
Right.
that's what I'm willing to pay for it. And it's like, well, and I guess in some cases where it's like Tracier or Clastolepis, it doesn't matter because there's so few of it. You're either going to pay the price to get it or you're just not going to own it. Right.
Yeah,
But, day
sure.
geckos, it's kind of like, it almost kind of drives the incentive for the rush to the bottom in sales, where people are kind of forced to like,
Kind of, yeah.
It. And so you either, because they, for day geckos, they're, they reproduce readily, and you should almost see captive bred animals for sale almost year round. They're so prolific, and there's enough people doing them that, I think that can drive the prices, where, the bigger day gecko people are selling their animals. And if you're a smaller person, hey, how do I compete with this person who's got, big internet presence or this or that? And well, maybe I make my animal a little bit cheaper. And then, that kind of mentality starts to drive to, well, let me see if I can get that cheaper. Hey, can you, and it's, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say that's the way it is, but I've seen it that way. Everybody who's ever bred reptiles knows the low baller, and somebody who just wants, the cheap to get it the cheapest they possibly can. And it's like, I don't know. It just sucks because I hate selling reptiles like that, because they're not respecting that animal if that's what they want. If the first thing they want is the cheapest price they can possibly pay for it, like, that's probably not the best starting place, right?
Right. Well, and it's especially we're starting to treat more reptiles like it, but there are still groups of reptiles that we treat that way in the idea of like fish tank people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dart frog people are our stereotypical fish tank people,
Mm-hmm.
where the enclosure and everything is by far the largest expense. And then if you're a big time nerd, sometimes frogs are expensive. Not
Mm-hmm.
really in comparison to most things, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're day geckos and a lot of the micro geckos are kind of on that track a little bit. And
Definitely.
it just is, they're kind of lagging behind a little bit.
Yeah.
Of like,
It's interesting.
Culture hasn't put it together.
Yeah.
Of
yeah. 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 And it's interesting though, because, like Grandis of the day gecko, it is almost one extreme of being so plentiful and the prices being not very high, whereas you go to any of the Lygodactylus species or any of the other the rare Phelsuma or any of the other smaller geckos, that it completely flips the other way, and those guys are getting whatever they're asking because they're rare enough, they're hard enough to produce, they're not kept and bred in enough numbers that it's a handful of people who are doing it, and I think that's probably a plus for all of those micro geckos. And I think they just have to, we just have to figure out some of those other, maybe Grandis is not a good example when you look at all those other kind of micro or smaller geckos that are from that area.
See, I've always, so I came from the saltwater hobby prior to this, and I did both when I was in college, and the professors that I worked for.
How did you possibly do saltwater while you were in college, man? Oh my gosh, that sounds like
their saltwater, not my saltwater.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha.
I was a student. I was learning theirs.
Gotcha.
But my thing is, so when I post college, donated all my stuff. When I was in grad school, I donated all my reptiles. Went to the military. When I was in the military, I was married, so we had one little fish tank, and then post military was just saltwater for a while. And I got into nano reefs and pico reefs, which are incredibly small fish tanks that are still trying to simulate the reef environment. So you basically could do it in your living room, but not spend $50,000. And so when you look at that side of fish keeping and reef keeping, it is really, really difficult. And the equipment is super specialized, and it's gotten a lot better on the industry side of things. And there's a lot of uniformity, and it helps with costs and stuff. So it's not super expensive now, but at one time it was incredibly expensive. There was a lot of DIY stuff. Even when you start to talk about pico reefs, like the super small stuff, it's still DIY, figure it out yourself. Nobody makes stuff for that. Like it's crazy to do. And it was a blast. I had so much fun because of the challenge of it. I think of what I do now for education, and most of my stuff is in a facility where I display things and stuff like that. Micro geckos are basically useless to me unless it's something where I'm doing, I do presentations at museums or institutions, and then I have to teach a science lesson or what have you to professionals or something, and then I'll just take the entire enclosure and bring 4 or 5 of the entire enclosure and explain plants and the whole explanation.
Yeah.
But for somebody like me, in my facility, dude, with the Grandis, I could build a baller enclosure because plants in small spaces suck.
Yeah.
Parameters in small spaces suck. It's so hard. That's why you look at the Frank Paynes and the guys like that, and the Leap Habitats thing they're doing now, and all these people that came out with Zilla came out with mini halogens or whatever, because it was so difficult to do these things in small spaces.
Yeah.
And I just think it's crazy. If you were looking at a day gecko, Grandis is the first one I would buy. So I don't mess it up. Get a pothos, get a hibiscus, make the background a nice green picture with some leaves and crap on it, rock out.
Yeah.
And the thing, it can be a 4x2x2 upright.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to do it in an Exoterra Nano with bryophytes and all these insane little plants I have to glue to stuff. That would I do those things, and it's super stressful. I need to pick the plants, and I have all these other details to worry about because the gecko can fit on my thumbnail.
Yeah.
And it's a blast. at my level of experience, and even at my level of experience, I find that challenging on the setup itself. And then we're going to talk about keeping a tiny gecko and feeding a tiny gecko and not drowning a tiny gecko and all these crazy things. It's where like I've just never got that, where like, oh yeah, the cheap one is the giant green one, like who cares, or like tokays, who cares, or whatever. And it's like, no man, they're big enough that you can see them. You're not going to squish it if you have to grab it in a mealworm cup when it escapes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can set up an enclosure where you won't cook it or freeze it because it can be 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
And in a 3 foot tall enclosure, you won't lose that gecko for 5 years and just hope it's eating the fruit flies. Like that's, it's a weird way to look at the hobby of.
I can't even tell you how many times I've been chasing tiny geckos across a wall, trying to get them into a deli cup so I can get them back in, just because I opened the door or the slider a little too much and they just boop, out, gone. And it's like, man, go do that. But you know, Grandis gets out, no big deal. Like they're easy to kind of, you know, they're easy to
catch that thing in a butterfly net.
Yeah, exactly.
They're huge.
Exactly. and you know, maybe they're not the greatest hold me gecko.
Sure.
No problem. But I don't, you know, I do have a couple of Grandis that will definitely let you pet them. They'll tolerate it. You could even probably pick them up, but they'll probably ghost on you and run around. And, you know, they're not super, you know, interactive, you know, child pet thing, but they certainly all display amazingly. If you set them up in a planted enclosure and they're at the glass, they're inquisitive, they're seeing what's going on. They kind of check all those boxes for something that it would be a great, you know, first time or beginner gecko. They certainly are not expensive. They're, you know, the stuff that's out there today is all really pretty nice. You can get a pretty wide range. I mean, they've even got them, you know, they've even got stuff that's coming blue, you know, turning blue. And like, so, you know, there's cool Grandis out there. And I think it's, you know, I talked about this on a podcast that Travis Wyman did. And, you know, I was saying how I think Grandis is a great beginner day gecko that just needs to kind of catch on a little bit more. But it seems like a lot of our focus goes into leopard geckos and other geckos, or it goes to the other extreme where you got like Europleides and like all these other rare geckos that are starting to establish. And so it's interesting. Like, you know, I kind of wonder, with all this stuff coming in now that's getting established, and we'll, you know, I see all the different types of geckos that Frank Payne's starting to keep, and you know, if his Williams eye are any indication, there's going to be a whole bunch of those geckos out there. And then what does that mean? You know, what does that mean? I mean, it's good. It's great for the hobby. Like there's no downside for me for that, but it's like, you wonder what the direction of the hobby becomes, right? Like where, and is that, will those always be higher end, you know, more pinnacle keeper geckos, and does maybe the day gecko become a bit more of a commonly I don't know. You know, I think it should. I definitely think it should, and I agree with you that it certainly would be one of my top choices to put as a display animal. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling at this point.
No, I mean I think it makes perfect sense in the, like when you talk about guys like Frank in that context of how, you know, the progression of the hobby or what have you, like that to me, that looks more like what other pet industries look like. Mm-hmm. And it starts to fall in line and starts to do what they do. And, you know, right or wrong, like most people that are in reptiles are like alternative or whatever. Like you want what a cat or a dog does. You just want a cooler looking thing to sit with you and watch TV. That's why
Yep.
you got a reptile originally. That's why I like big lizards straight up.
Yeah.
And I know that. I walk them on a
Yeah.
leash. I
Yeah.
understand that about me.
Yeah.
But like, if we kind of fall in line with what other pets are doing in the idea of, you know, all these hardcore crazy geckos, like, you know, Europlatus and these different things of like, all right, that's genuinely hard to do. Like it's different. It takes like very specific parameters. They're very difficult to care for, so on and so forth. And I don't know, like to think of it, and I don't personally think there's anything wrong with looking at it a little bit in the idea of levels and a little bit of the stratification, not necessarily in like you're not smart enough to care for it or whatever, but like if you look at the fish side of things, everybody can take care of a fish. That's fine. Like everybody gets it. You know, you buy a filter, set the thing up, blah blah blah. Like there's a reason that big box stores don't carry certain fish, and you got to go to a fish nerd store, and you know, and then you have to have your water tested, or you need alkaline, or these weird parameters. Like it's not that you aren't smart enough to keep an angelfish. It's just that you have to be willing to buy acidic water or whatever the case may be, or this fancy bubble filter or this thing that it has to have in order to survive. And if you're down and you want to below $300 on this filter, you totally could keep this fish. It's not hard. It's still just a box with water in it, but you got to do this thing. You know, there are set steps. I think like snakes is such a different animal to where you can kind of get away with so many things that like if you know how to keep snakes for North American colubrids, like if you add a little bit more heat, don't do as crazy of a winter, you could basically keep most pythons except a couple of weird ones. Go into Europe, it's just like your stuff. Go into Indonesia, 12 and 12, rain or not, rock on. There's not a whole lot more to it unless you get really, really specific, and you can't afford that snake, so don't worry about it. Like, you know, whereas when you're talking about lizards, you know, if I keep, you know, leopard geckos and fat tails and eublafarids and things like that, and then I got some cresteds. They don't really need heat. That's pretty cool. I know how to do Pangea or whatever. I'm gonna get a panther chameleon. Like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
It's just not the same thing.
Yeah.
You absolutely can. And if you can keep a leopard gecko, you have the skill set to keep a chameleon, no problem. Read the book, do what you're supposed to do, 100%. You can do it as an adult who can follow directions, right? Or a kid who can follow directions. The equipment, the things that you have to be successful are not the same.
Right.
And so you as long as you say, hey, Frank, what do I need for this little weirdo gecko that only eats bean beetles and has to live under 12% UVB? And Frank's going to go, bean beetles and 12% UVB.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, they won't live. Like, there's just requirements. You know what I mean? But I also think that kind of makes sense to people. And if we have a problem of, like, people make fun of the Facebook groups or whatever, but like the reason people make fun of those Facebook groups is that's where the crux of the issue is, I think, of, oh, you can't do that. Like you haven't been in the hobby for 5 years. You're not ready for a chameleon, or like you're somehow not good enough or in some way. It's like, yo, dude, you keep lizards in boxes. It's not that big of a deal. Like, you just need to do it the right way.
Yep.
And if you just explain to people like, hey man, these are the lights, this is the box, you need some plants, whatever your weird thing is for your weird species, it does cost this much money to do that because equipment is always expensive. And they go, okay, yeah, I understand. I get that. You know, get me a Miss King. Do well. You know, you're gonna drop $1,500. Like, cool, man. Go buy you a panther chameleon. Just rock out. Like, I don't see an issue with presenting it that way. And I think so many more people would jive with that if you know, for somebody like yourself, where you're like, hey man, these are really tiny. This part's really difficult. Babies, kind of a pain. Like, Grandis are gigantic. Everybody likes green. Everybody likes green stuff. Well, that's why some weirdos still keep green tree pythons. It's just a snake on a stick. Like, but they're beautiful.
Well, but we used to think that green tree pythons were difficult, and they
Right.
were. They were. But why? Because we didn't have those basic things nailed down with them. And then once we did, what we found out was they're bulletproof.
Yep.
I mean, you can, meet their basic husbandry needs and ignore them, and they're just absolutely bulletproof, right? And so
Yep.
I think green trees are a really great example of one that just goes the complete other direction of like people were killing those things left and right, overfeeding them, humidifying their enclosures and doing just untold damage to them. And then when they just backed off a few things, all of a sudden it was like, whoa, these things are absolutely the most simple, basic, straightforward thing in the world. Like, oh, okay, cool. And as long as you meet those needs, and I think just like panther chameleons, and figuring out what you need to do is the hardest part of that. And once you do, if you can teach other people, then it's not easy, but it's less insurmountable. So I guess going back to like a lot of those geckos that are starting to be bred and they're really difficult. They're difficult now. But my question would be like, will they be difficult later? And going back to a Reptile Fight Club, Justin and I were talking about, tech in our industry and how I feel like we need like it's like we can barely get reptile cage manufacturers that can scale production and do kind of some nuanced kind of things, much less get people who are building false rock wall, like making like very specialized habitat type of things. And we certainly have the manufacturing capabilities with all the technology we have around our manufacturing sectors. It just takes the people from the reptile industry to interface those technologies and start making those things. You know what I mean? And we're just not there yet. And I think you see some of it, like you see the push into LED. You see you see some of these technologies starting to like, okay, this doesn't maybe we go to something that's, oh, wow, low wattage. If we can get this in the right spectral curve, then, oh my gosh, that's a game changer for most reptile people who, rather than spending 51 watts per bulb, they're spending 3 or 6 or 9 watts per bulb. Like, whoa, that's a big savings, but I just think that we are behind the curve of the fish community, of a lot of these communities that have kind of embraced the tech side of things before the animal side of things. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I just don't know if we're there yet, like in popularity to have. I don't know. Like, I guess my question would be like, if it was profitable and if somebody could do, like, wouldn't we already have it by now? Like, maybe it's one of these things where it just doesn't, I don't know. It's weird because you see like the Zoo Meds and the Zillas going to like still selling half round logs and like just stuff that's like, why are we doing that? Why are we still doing that? Like, you're a company that specializes in reptiles and you've got this, like we can do better than that, way better than that. And I don't know if it's like, the fossil fuel argument of like, well, it's our steady supply chain. It's already there. If we change it, we're going to have to spend a bunch of money in research and development and changing tooling and all these things to get these new whatevers out to market. And we just don't want to do that. So we're selling half round logs until the cows come home. I kind of feel like that's what it is. And if that's the case, then it's on, young reptile entrepreneurs like Ryan McVeigh, like the Ryan McVeighs out there who want to come in and say, hey, I think I can do better than this. I think I have this idea, and to get in there and innovate in the market. But yeah, I mean, certainly we definitely have such a long way to go. And I think we're doing better in some aspects, but I still think that we can do even better. And, it'll be interesting. Some of it's a structural issue, in the fact that it depends on what you keep, right? Like if I have a snake room and I keep mostly desert stuff, if I wanted to keep tropical or subtropical, I'm gonna have a hard time there. That's a tough bridge to make. So you almost need two reptile buildings at that point, or two separate rooms that are completely independent of each other, and never mind people trying to do at scale in their house, or something like that. But if you're just talking about an enclosure in your house and it's a display thing, certainly that should be pretty easy for us to tool up and start making some of these cool specialty things where we can bring a slice of Australia or a slice of the desert Southwest or a slice of wherever right into an enclosure. And, we can think around appropriate environmental lighting and heating that works for that animal we're putting in there. But we're just broad brushing things right now, and it's all on the individual to kind of figure out how to meet those needs. And it's kind of like we can't even we agree that UV is important. We don't agree on how much. We don't agree on how strong. We don't. We have an idea, but It's like until we can nail some of that down, man, that's going to be tough for the individual to make good choices, right?
Right. Well, and that's the weird thing about having a hobby that is also an industry.
Yeah.
Like it's the Mike Stefani is always in the chat, and he builds crazy monitor enclosures, right? And
yes, he does.
A part of what people love about Mike is the enclosures that he builds, which is solely reliant on his artistic ability and carpentry skills and things like that, or Trumbauer posts pictures of his enclosures, and the interior of the enclosure, fairly simple. He's a pretty simple, old school colubrid keeper type dude. The enclosures are insane. The carpentry is it's wonderful. It's some of the coolest looking stuff I've ever seen. And people talk to him all the time about it. Oh, it's beautiful, and so on and so forth. And like, people value that so much. And then it's like, making cork tubes or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, like that's that weird disconnect of like, if you're going to make one and put it in a store, and then you're going to be like, oh, hey, these are like the rock wall that Mike Stefani made. Like, if I look at Mike's stuff and your stupid rock doesn't look like that, I'm not going to buy it. Like, and it's one of like, you really need to come with it in order to be impressive, I guess, because, Mike, Cody and Pia, Wellspring Herpetoculture, these different people that are doing these enclosures that are naturalistic are just crazy. And it's like, how did they do that? It's like, oh, Cody's insane and takes pictures of lichen, and then him and a dude paint rocks for 3 hours in their garage. And then you're like, oh, you're crazy. That's how you did that. Got it. Okay. My rocks won't look like that.
And I think the challenge is finding a way to take those people who have those skills, and like, just like any, like there's a company that does a lot of the rock work for zoos. And I think they're like out of Texas or somewhere like that, but they do most of the zoos in North America because they're the company that does that, right? Because they've figured out how to do that, and that's who they go to. And so taking that, finding a way to create molds, which are plug and play in different types of and figuring out how to do that, and then having it so you have some iterations in there where you can change things around, or you can do this, or they come colored, or you can have a kit or something like that, where you're kind of taking exactly what Cody does, and you're putting it to somebody in a way that's like, listen, you don't have to do all of this, but here's this, and here's this. Have fun with it. This is what you need. Here's a picture. Try it out. See what you think. And I think people would go for that. I think, but I'm not seeing, it seems like it's all on the individual, which is cool for those people like Justin. Justin loves doing stuff like that. And I'm just like, yeah, dude, it's awesome. I just don't have the time. I wish I had the extra time to do stuff like that. It's like, I can barely keep up with my life as it is. I don't have time to paint rocks over 3 or 4 times because I can't keep getting it right. You know what I mean? So I feel like there's people who, one, are in my situation, or in the situation of like, I don't even know how to do any of that. Like, that would be too much. And so they are like, yeah, I just got this half round log thing, and my reptile hides under that, and Zoom Ed did the trick. Thumbs up. It's like, no, I don't know. I digress, but
sounds like you're pitching a company idea for your retirement plans.
It would be that would be great. And like I wish I was more had a bit, and maybe thermoforming plastics or thermoforming stuff is something I need to start to understand. But I mean, there certainly could be some pretty cool, you could do some pretty cool wall outcropping things. And I think,
especially the fact that most of our enclosures are fairly uniform like that.
Yeah.
That only helps that situation.
And if you could find the right cage manufacturer to pair with, and you actually started producing stuff that complemented theirs, it's like there's definitely ways to, I think, do that. And I don't know. It's definitely something I'd like to see. I'd like to see the industry get a little bit more specialized in, give the keepers more options. And, I think I agree with you that I don't think people get excited about the animals, and I don't get, it's a select nerdy few that get excited about having to build their own enclosure and making it look like, their slice of wherever they're putting that, wherever they got their reptile from. And that's a select few. And I think if you could do that for people, that would, that would create a second level, just like people like see Mike Stefani stuff and are like, oh my God, that would be so sick having, Gil and I in that cage in my house. Like, I'd freaking go crazy over that. Right. Like, I just think people don't know how to get there,
right.
Or some people don't. Anyway.
Yeah. So we are an hour and 45-ish in.
I can't believe I talked this long.
We had one reference in the chat, and we have your reference in your name on the screen.
Yeah.
What is the McInWookie? What is the reference for the McInWookie?
Yeah. So for the better
for non-MPR people.
Yeah. So for the better part of 10 years now, the Morelia Python Radio Network and Morelia PythonRadio.com have had a co-host. And some of you may or may not be familiar with Owen McIntyre. But Owen has always maintained that he doesn't believe in the Sasquatch, in the North American forest yeti. And, I think most people who know Owen, truly know Owen, know this not to be true. And, I have an interest. I wouldn't call myself a squatcher per se. I had a boss who was definitely a squatcher, and he was pretty hilarious. But then it occurred to me one day when I was watching NPR, and I, I was like, Owen is the Wookiee. He is the Squatch, hiding in plain sight. And now it all made sense to me why he, would have to vehemently deny the existence of Sasquatch. So from that point, all of that coming to light, I named him aptly the McInWookie. So that's where the McInWookie came about, and so we
And a shirt does exist.
There
right?
does, yes.
Does
So
exist.
so
And that
we
went
did.
to Andy Middleton.
Andy
right?
Middleton is the owner
Okay.
of the only McInWookie shirt in existence. It is one of a kind, just like the McInWookie himself. So yeah, and so and anybody who knows Owen knows how vehemently he denies his love for the Squatch, and so through some coaching and conversation, I am happy to tell every one of your listeners that Owen has now embraced the McInWookie, and he's down, man. He is down to make merch. He's down for portrayals of. I mean, this is like we're talking about. Eric, we call the Podfather. So like he was saying that he would be down for some type of portrayal as the McInWookie with the Podfather kind of dressed up as the Pope, and so all of these great visualizations.
Oh, dude, that'd be cool.
Wouldn't it, dude? I'm telling you. And so this is what I really wanted Owen to kind of grasp is how amazing the McInWookie could be, and the persona of the NPR guys now being the Podfather and the McInWookie. It's amazing. The potential is so out there. And plus, who better as a spokesperson for all of the hide and seek champion Squatches in North America than Owen McIntyre, right? I mean, can we agree? Can we not agree?
He does get left out of a lot of great herping trips. I mean,
definitely.
That's awesome.
He's hiding. So yeah. So go ahead.
No, so I was just going to tell folks who are listening to the podcast, if you are a THN person or just a lizard nerd and don't know much about NPR, this has been a long-running joke. It is hilarious to hear Owen refer to it in different episodes, and he's just now cluing into the McInWookie part of the joke, even though people have been giving him a hard time about the Sasquatch thing forever.
Yeah, forever.
So yeah, it's hilarious. He is a very good-natured dude. He takes it all in stride. People message him in Instagram, DM him pictures of Sasquatch stuff all the time. It's really funny. And yeah, it's been a long-running thing that it's really good. And of course, if you ever listen to NPR,
he's resisted it so long.
He fought hard. He fought very hard.
And the fact that we can bring him full circle and now he is on board is just like, it's like progress. It's like a breakthrough, it's progress. It's amazing.
Yep. And it's been a pretty funny like evolution of things, because Chuck was saying earlier about how he was kind of new to field herping, and Eric and some of the folks on the NPR side are also fairly new to field herping, and they're all from the Northeast. And so that just gave them more opportunity to dig at him about going out in the woods and Sasquatch and all that stuff. So it's been really funny. So if you are a THN person or just a lizard nerd who listens to my stuff, definitely check out the other side of things with the NPR folks. The shows themselves are awesome anyhow, but it's cool to be involved in those little communities to get those inside jokes and those long running funny things of like, it's kind of like this, like they don't just talk snakes, or the Fight Club doesn't just debate things. Like there's a whole little community wrapped around that. It's really cool. So
one of the things that's really important to me is kind of the camaraderie and the jokes that come out of that, and like that is very in my personality, and like I always like to do a different outro for every episode that we do, and I try to make it different. And I actually got that from Owen. Owen did the used to do NPR outros, and I love them so much, and I started doing my own. And then the Podfather jumped in and like made it a contest, and Eric's like Owen's like I don't want to have a contest with him. And so yeah, I feel bad because now I feel like I stole Owen's outro thing. And but yeah, it's definitely, we try to keep it live, and I just love all those guys. They're so fun, and they're so, they're just cool dudes, man. Into what I'm into, and kind of on the journey all together. And I feel the same way with all you guys. Like, and I feel like that's why it's like, even though we're different radio networks or different podcast networks, we're kind of one team, one fight. And it's cool, man. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. And I've actually brought that up with a handful of people. So like, I started this out and it was people that I knew. And then it progressed into, of course, the hundreds, if not thousands of people I don't know that are lizard nerds like me. And most, probably all of those people, they come to me from other people. Like, I'll have people tell me like, oh, this dude's into that gecko, or she's into this lizard, or whatever. And they're like, oh, you should Instagram them, or you should message them, or things like that. And like, that is kind of how this developed. It never was like the dude with the most leopard geckos or what. Like, I don't know enough about it to know who that guy is in the first place, but so it didn't come to me that way. It was very much in that community of people, and they would reference a person like, oh, hey, have you ever met so-and-so? They're really into Australian geckos or whatever. And either I was like, oh yeah, I know who that is, or I have no idea. They would introduce me or whatever. And they are all kind of like we were talking before, like they're all that similar mindset. Like, everybody's been cool. They're all, kind of into the same stuff, or not necessarily the same stuff, but maybe in the same way, or have a lot of similar stories and things like that, to where what they're keeping or where they live is super different from me, or there's like enough diversity there that, I'm trying to make it match. Oh, how would I do that in Illinois or what have you? But when they're talking about their dude or their chick growing up, or this story or whatever, I'm like, I know that. I know that thing, and all of the different podcasts and stuff, it kind of feels that same way, where they're all, especially on the NPR side, there's so many, and they're talking about so many diverse topics that are all kind of influenced by Australian species, but diversifying more. But then when you hear people talk, or you hear how they refer to each other, like, oh, okay, yeah, I see how these personalities, and Eric, met those people, or Owen knew this guy, and you see those connections. And it's a different way of doing it, but like this is what I think most people had in their mind for how, like, Facebook, social media circles of influence and friends and small communities. I think that's what they thought was going to happen. And it just didn't shake out that way for however it worked.
It's interesting because it was like, before NPR started, we had Morelia Pythons Forum. It was it was just an internet forum that Jim Karosky started, and then Sean Christian took over, and then Facebook came about. And if the NPR family first iteration was the Morelia Pythons Forum, its second iteration was Facebook, and now that it's the Morelia Pythons Radio Network, I feel like that's the like you've said, kind of the realization of where from those two iterations we wanted to get to. And now you see, groups of guys who only knew each other on the internet going herping and the different, portions of the continental US, and, the East Coast guys are coming to the West Coast, and vice versa. And so it's, it's kind of, it seems to be that evolving, kind of, and I've always liked carpets. I've always liked the Morelia Python community, because it's been a family, and for me, and a better or worse family sometimes, and I think that's probably the case with any group of where I'm sure the ball python community probably has their version of the family or whatever. But for me, this is what it's been. And I've really enjoyed watching it change from that just, written word of two people going at it, and, debating carpet pythons and talking carpet pythons, to the forums, or from the forums to social media, the early social media, where you could put a face with a name and you get to know people, and you had kind of more personal connectivity, to where now we're, broadcasting regularly, and kind of cross networking. And there's just, we're meshing kind of families much more readily. And I think it's really interesting. And technology's kind of been an interesting thing. And now you see like Facebook's kind of on the way out, and people are really like, I can't even, Eric won't even go to Facebook anymore. What are you doing, dog? So, but yeah, it's been interesting.
So I was a king snake forum guy back in the day.
Me too.
Especially for monitor lizards. That I mean, that like Mike Stefani, Frank Reitz, all those names that people have heard me reference. That's where I knew those folks from. Like Frank and Mike are older than me, and so I was like super new as a keeper when I was watching what they were doing and seeing their pictures and stuff. And these formats and how these interactions happen feels to me way more like that. So like that was always the thing, especially like, the Morelia Python forums. Like that was always a joke of like, you knew when like Nick Mutton got off work or whatever, everybody like, yeah, go check the posts at like 4th. Like that's just a blast people. And like, you would see like these debates going on, and like, but you knew that it wasn't instantaneous, kind of like social media is now, because people would get off work, or they would check, or especially things like carpet pythons, you got weird time differences for Australian people that were chiming in or whatever. And the monitor lizard forums in king snake were crazy. Frank would go nuts on all sorts of things. And so it was a very similar interactions, but it like all of those people knew for the most part who all those other people were. Like it might have been by screen name or whatever, but like you kind of figured it out. Like so-and-so keeps this, so-and-so keeps that. That guy's kind of an idiot. He starts a lot of fights. This dude knows all kinds of stuff. This guy works at a zoo, whatever. And then the way these things kind of have taken shape feels very similar. Like, and that's why I like this particular format of like having a conversation with a side chat that's going, because it seems similar. Because like even for Frank on that North American herping group that he posts in all the time now, Francis Baines comments on his stuff, and it basically becomes a discussion between the two of them that we get to watch, which is crazy because the amount of knowledge in the discussion is mind-boggling. And then idiots like us are back there like, I have a small question about this one thing I don't understand because I don't know the words that you used or whatever, Like the forum was the same way. They'd be going nuts, and then there'd be like this one little sidebar comment where you could see the drop down of like, oh my God, who asked them a question? And the guy was like, what kind of lizard is that? And you're like, oh, you idiot. It's going to be insane. Whereas this is kind of, it's a different animal. But that feeling is the same of like, this is going on. And then it's, oh, Mike Stefani's there. And we were talking about, and it gives you those little reference points of conversation in the group setting.
And I feel like maybe if if this is a media that the text or the texture of the media is getting richer from the forum days to the social media days to now what we have is,
Yeah.
multi-platform social media. It's just getting much richer in the way that, like, I mean, I don't remember back in Morelia Python days ever getting in the middle of any of those conversations. You either just sat back and watched it or you participated in it.
Right.
And it's kind of and I don't know, maybe there was some of that happened, but I feel like our ability to interact and to have more of a personal, this feels way more personal to me, and
Oh, yeah.
somebody else 2 months from now can watch this and be like, oh, that was cool, hey, I message me or something and say, hey man, I caught the podcast you did with Bill, a couple months back, like, hey, I wanted to ask you this or whatever, like, that's cool. And I feel like I know, like, when you kind of knew who people were in the forums, but like, I feel like in this kind of a format, I know, like, if I listen to somebody who podcasts, like, I feel like I know that person, even if I've never met them. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, and if you were a forum person back in the day, and depending on, quite literally reading between the lines, like sometimes you would watch, like, everybody gives Nick Mutton a hard time, right? Like, he's a super opinionated dude. He really likes to debate things.
He deserves the hard time he gets sometimes. He knows it.
But people like that, where, oh yeah, he fully embraces it. But like,
oh yeah, for
there
sure.
are times where Frank Frank Reed's similar guy. I can distinctly remember, especially with Frank, I can distinctly remember reading these crazy threads in the Monitor forums where I was like, and got heated, didn't really like some folks, went back and forth pretty hot there. And you could read it and be like, I don't think that's what that dude meant.
Yeah.
And by that time, you're like 3 comments in and he's an idiot, and it's and we never did figure out how to keep the lizard or whatever, what the heat lamp that it went off the rails.
It just it devolves into just,
yeah. Whereas in this format, I think you eliminate that part of it. Of like, if I felt some kind of way or was actually trying to get into it with you or what have you, like, you could see my face and you would know. You know what I mean? As opposed to if I'm typing out a question or whatever, and you or I just misconstrued the context, and then there's no sarcasm font. That's always a joke about social media, and you miss all of that. And I think this particular format really solved a problem there in the forum format, and it distilled out, or currently distills out, a ton of the, like, stereotypical, what people think of as like negative for Facebook groups of just, toxic people and conversations and things. Having it be more of a conversation, and then the chat kind of chiming in or guiding it, or, oh, this was funny or what have you. Like, if this conversation was toxic, nobody would listen to it. It solves the problem immediately.
Sure. Yeah.
And then if if for whatever reason something stupid was in the chat or whatever, or like, you'll randomly get like YouTube bots or dumb stuff in the chat or whatever, the 2 people having the conversation now have the ability to just ignore that and continue to converse. And if you watch this on YouTube or you listen to it on, Spotify or whatever, like, that you would never know, like, that would never have a negative impact on you getting Lygodactylus information or what have you. And it really seemed to solve a lot of the problems of different social media platforms.
I completely agree. And in the beginning, you said that I was opinionated, and I definitely think I'm opinionated. And I try not to be opinionated in a negative, like I try not to be dogmatic with my opinion. I try to be pretty open minded. Like I certainly am opinionated. I have my opinions, but I think anybody who's kind of listened to me enough knows like I'm thinking. Will I have my opinion? And I'm very open to changing my opinion if somebody can present me something that, will sway me from my opinion. And I don't think back in the day when people used to be like, oh boy, here goes Chuck, caught that part of me. You know what I mean? They caught the opinionated part, and probably in some ways they're like, man, this guy's kind of a jerk. Like, geez, him and his opinion can go walk off a pier. And it's like, I think maybe you missed some of the nuance of who I am. And I think, it gives you, again, more of an opportunity to get the more well-rounded, you see how things are said in context. You can get people's body language out of it. You can hear them kind of go back and forth readily about it. And it's not just some words typed on a screen for you to misinterpret the delivery of,
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, just text getting richer in context,
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, the last time I said something about time was a half hour ago. So
I know, right?
Where can people find you to ask you obscure questions prior to not buying a day gecko?
So I am still on Facebook. They can look me up, Chuck Poland, and you can message me. I'm on Instagram. My handle is Chuck Norris Wins. I am a big Chuck Norris fan. I think he's hilarious. But I do a weekly podcast on the Morelia Pythons radio network with my amazing host, Dr. Justin Julander. We put out Reptile Fight Club. So if you ever have an interesting topic or want to fight about something reptile related, please hit me or Justin up. We love to get guests on. We definitely need to have Bill on again. You were probably one of my favorites to come on, man. So I again think the world of you.
I will say, so for those that don't know, I went on, one of the things that I discussed was the Invisible Arc with Casey Cannon.
A fantastic episode.
It was awesome. And
it was
Casey's
fantastic.
A super good dude.
Yeah.
But what I'm not sure a lot of folks know, Casey has, like, if you hear Casey talk about it, or we're in a couple of group chats and different things, or for folks that if you watch Snakes and Stogies on YouTube, Casey is quite frequently in the chat on that. He always refers back to that episode of like he feels like he's the guy that bashed the barkers, and they're like pinnacle figures in herpetoculture, and he's like, yeah, I'm the idiot. I said that they didn't know what they were talking about, and he like, I don't know, it comes across like he's almost embarrassed that he had the opposite viewpoint in the debate, where he's like, I had to go against the book, and it was written by them, and they're like the greatest people ever.
That's Fight Club, man. That's Fight Club. That's how it is.
It's super funny. And
yeah.
And I will also say that even in the debate, like Casey's on it. Like it was a really good debate, and
it was a great debate.
And the tenets in the book are really good, and it's awesome. That I highly recommend the book. And the barkers are, of course, also amazing. But to hear him go through the debate and the things that we were going back and forth on, like, dude was on it. Like he really did make a lot of great points, despite the fact that book was written by, really amazing people. But no, man, he continues to talk about, like, I was the guy that had to go against the Barker book, and it's really good.
I mean, and that's kind of one of those things where you know, hey, I have said plenty of things on Reptile Fight Club that do not represent my personal opinion, right? Like if I had to disagree with something, it doesn't mean that I don't think Dave and Tracy are amazing or in any way, shape, or form take anything from their contribution. But for the sake of, you know, a discussion and a presentation of the other side, you got to argue against that. And if you're against Dave and Tracy in that argument, in the end, hopefully everybody understands that's not against Dave and Tracy. That's just the side you got on the coin flip that you had to argue. And, you know, a lot of times it's really hard in Fight Club because you end up trying to agree with somebody because the side you get is just so hard to argue against. But and people who think, oh, I can go on to Fight Club and I can argue that. You see the tough time that they have sometimes because it's not easy when you have to go against your personal held belief, because that's when you really find out who thinks through their opinions, who thinks through what they think. And it's just, I don't know, it's so fun. And you guys did such an amazing job. I think the Invisible Arc was such a great topic. It's so relevant. Both of you guys brought it big time, you know, and Casey, don't ever feel bad about having to position against the Barkers. If they took it personally, then they misunderstood what Fight Club was. And, you know, trust me, they have such a name that I seriously doubt that if that bruises their ego, then I would be concerned, right? I mean, Dave should not hold that against you.
It's no, and you know, quite a few of the other episodes have been really cool where, you know, you will see that, like, and you guys kind of make reference to it and joke a little bit that sometimes people give you a hard time about, you know, you end up agreeing and you didn't really fight the whole time.
We call it Reptile Mild Disagreement Club sometimes. Like,
but it's
hard. Like, I mean,
it's an actual debate though. Like that's why.
But like, if you're talking about like shady reptile business practices, how do you argue for shady reptile business practices?
Right.
Like that they're a good thing. Like it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. But there is, because there's shady reptile business practices, there's a reason that they happen. And so maybe arguing for them helps people understand why the people who engage in that. And it's much deeper than just they're a bad person. And, you know, it's everybody, you know, people are complex. Life is complex. Everything we do is very complex. And one of the big things that I like to get out of Reptile Fight Club is, you know, parsing out those complexities, because there's a lot for people to think about.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, like, especially for you guys, where if it's an episode where it's just the two of you and one of you has to pick, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to be for or against or what have you? Like, that's where you can see it of, you know, you both usually start out a pro and a con, and you state kind of like your surface opinion of whatever the subject may be. And then it always, what I think some of the people that might like jokingly complain about the fight part that they're sort of missing is it breaks down into the why. And then what you guys usually end up for the bulk of the episode discussing is why yes or why no, as opposed to here are my 17 checks for yes and here are my 15 checks for no, Chuck loses. Like, no, what it ends up being is you guys have this big, you know, wide-ranging discussion of why this thing happened, or, you know, why we were using these light bulbs, and why, you know, the evolution, when you guys talked about UV and different things, like, it got super into the weeds because it had to, because it wasn't just, oh, I don't use it and I've read a bunch of stuff, shut up. Like, well, no, then the episode would be 4 minutes. Like, no, so it really gets into the how and why of things. It's awesome. Yeah, I definitely recommend it.
And I think, some of the complaint that we got from Fight Club was that it wasn't enough like yelling and fighting. And one, we have to be able to make a point. And two, nobody wants to come on a podcast if they have to, be disagreeable and have to fight and look bad. Like people have a reputation to protect. So, we definitely want to present the positive up and up side and give people something to think about. Anyway.
Well, and like, first of all, if you don't understand the pop culture reference of it being Fight Club, stop what you're doing and go figure that out. And secondly, Reptile Fight Club just sounds cooler than Reptile Debate Club. Yeah. But like, it's a debate. It's a real. That's what I always thought was cool. Was like, that's such a strange thing to me. Of why isn't it more dramatic or like, that. What a weird thing to complain about. Mm-hmm. Like in this day and age, that's a strange thing to have as a complaint of wanting it to be more dramatic. Like, no, it's an actual debate with some really smart people talking about these topics.
But if you think about like a lot of the social media, the YouTube stuff, people clickbait on a guy getting rolled up by a croc because he did something dumb. Because why? Not because they want to learn about crocs, because they want to see somebody get jacked up by a croc. You know what I mean? So people like the carnage. People like to slow down where the traffic accident is, horrible, and watch the scene. And I think that's part of it. But that's not what we're trying to do. You know what I mean? That's not we're that we're the anti that at Reptile Fight Club.
Yes. Yeah.
Project Mayhem is not trying to, reinforce the sensationalist YouTubers.
Right. Yeah. Which we need more of. I don't know. I really enjoy the format, and when you guys have referenced that a few times where folks have said that to you, and I'm just like, oh man. But I also think that probably in a way helps you, because I would bet that sort of distills your audience out and gets rid of that type of thing. Because if you came there for that, you're not going to stay, because that you're not going to get that. And if you came for the reptile debate and this information, and you wanted to hear Ron St. Pierre talk about keeping stuff outside or whatever, like these crazy things you guys have been able to talk about and get super in depth on, you will get that. And so I think the people that you're keeping are serious, I guess, like dedicated, or just more serious. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I'd like to do, and Justin's really busy and I'm really busy. So, when you were like, hey, I need a thumbnail for this episode and stuff, I'm like, I totally messed it up and I didn't send you one, because we're not that organized. We don't do any of that. We are literally like, what's our topic today? Okay, that's what we're going with. Do we have a guest? No. Okay, we're going to record this. We're going to do that. And I want us to get, I want to pull academia in more. I want to have,
that'd be cool.
I want to have some real experts in there. And I feel like Justin and I can have a pretty good conversation. And so I feel like some of the most interesting stuff has just sometimes been him and I in certain situations talking. But I think for the listener, I want to give the listener, real academia. And I mean, that's what we talk about, right? And that's what we really are proponents of. And yet we haven't been delivering. So, one of my my hopes and goals is to definitely get more of the hardcore academia on there, and get some real heavy hitters when we start to talk about some of these things, so that, it's not just me and Justin like, well, actually. So
you're going to wait until the book comes out and let Scott Eiper yell at Warren Booth, and then Warren Booth come at him with genetics?
See, I like you, Bill. I like you.
I only said that because I know Scott listens, so I'm sure he's going to, in like,
definitely. Oh, Scott would love it. He's ready. I guarantee he's cracking his knuckles right now.
Oh, yeah.
So definitely.
And in his car when he randomly calls people in America to talk on podcasts all the time.
Right.
Yeah. The dude has a weird life.
I know. He hit me at work one time and I'm like, I can't take this. I'm super busy right now.
And because it's gonna be like an hour. Like you're not just gonna you're not gonna talk to that dude and be like, oh yeah, so what's going on in your life today? No, he has like an in-depth vertebrate biology question about coastal carpets. Like he doesn't just call you to say what's up.
Nope. No, yeah, and in the same way that Nick will talk your ear off to sell you a snake, Iper will call you to have a discourse, debatable conversation about some topic that he needs to grind an axe with.
Yeah,
which is good. I mean, that's awesome. So yes, I cannot wait for the book to come out. I'm sure we will get at least one Aussie on to talk about some of the assertions and things in the book. So I'm sure Justin is gearing up for that. But yeah, the blue line is in, so it's off to the printer. So hopefully. Hopefully COVID doesn't screw up the printing process too bad and we can get it out. Right. They can get it out soon. I have nothing to do with that. I just want my copy.
Right? That's for sure. Yeah. All right, man. Well,
cool,
we're at
man.
Like 2:20, so
I know.
I think we're going to wrap it up.
All right.
I really appreciate you coming on, dude. It was awesome.
Yeah, I hope I didn't ramble too much. It's an honor as always, and we're going to have to get you on the show soon too.
For sure. All right. Well,
all right, man.
Tend to your crazy dogs that are quiet for a while.
Oh my God. Like she's quiet now. She's like, the action's over. I have made my presence known. No, she's sitting right here next to me. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No, she
quiet then.
Yeah, when she gets she's a Velcro dog. She likes to be right next to me, and she whines, and then when she hears something, she gets all, she wants to let everybody know. So,
okay, that explains a whole lot of episodes.
Oh yeah, super loyal, but not great for podcasting.
Awesome.
All right. Have a good night, man.
You too.
Later.
All right. That was awesome. Episode 39. I am super glad Chuck came on and agreed to talk to me. Like you guys heard him say, he's actually a little bit newer to the tiny geckos and has been having really cool breeding success. And now working on getting the babies out to folks. I am so happy that it continues to evolve this way with my guests. It's this group, it's this community of people, and it's always good people and cool conversation. I was kind of cracking a joke. We were like an hour in before we started talking about lizards, which is exactly what I told my wife would happen. So that was really cool. I encourage you guys to check out the Reptile Fight Club. You will absolutely learn something if you listen to them talk. It is the topics are great. They have really cool guests on all the time. When it's just the two of them debating, they have an awesome dynamic, and how they go back and forth with each other is really funny. And they're both very well-rounded as far as education goes in herpeticulture and a million other topics. So you're definitely going to learn something listening to them talk. Go check out NPR. Try to friend Owen McIntyre on Facebook. Send him Sasquatch pictures. I think it's hilarious. I hope Andy shares his wonderful artwork on his shirt soon, and we can continue to give Owen a hard time. He's a good dude. It's funny. It's cool that to have community and long-standing jokes like that's a good time. So, as always, this is part of Herpeticulture Network, and it's brought to you by Black Box Cages. I love their stuff. I am still working on all of my things. The plants for going in the forest and rainforest Madagascar enclosures. My wife was watering and repotting things yesterday, and so we're going to start to break plants apart and decide how we're going to put those in. I'm using the Zilla plant LEDs in the top of that, and so not worried about lighting or anything like that. We just want to make sure that we're not going to crowd things, and we have it set up how we want. Probably going to use pothos as the extra stuff just because it's nice to have extra greenery in there. But the actual plants themselves, I'm using African species, hyacinth beans, and some other things. And so it'll actually sort of match at least a little bit where they're from. Lots of purples, lots of dark greens. And so the Paradura, we'll probably never see it again. but it's going to be a really cool place for the lizard to live. The boivini are huge, so we should be able to see them just fine. But yeah, it's going to be a good time. I encourage you to check out their enclosures. I believe I heard Justin saying on a couple of different episodes that there might be some new sizes available on Black Box, and I think one of them might be an 8-footer. So you guys know I keep giant stuff, and so that will be definitely something I'm checking out. Hopefully, it was down in Georgia when I saw them at a show, and so if I can get back down to that part of the country and actually see their stuff in person, I can't wait to see the new things they're doing. I really want to get one of their 6x3x3s and put some tegus in it. So we'll have to see how that goes down the line. I will see you guys all again in 2 weeks. Later.